What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MI Gardener channel. It is an absolute scorcher out today. It's 93 degrees. That's right, 93 degrees. You heard that correct. And if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds pretty hot, it is very hot. It's actually an all-time record. But it's also crazy because we just set an all-time record 2 weeks ago for the coldest temperature ever, and that was 25 degrees. So we went from 25 degrees to 93 degrees in just 2 weeks. So it's been something else here in Michigan. And as I've said at least 100 times here on this channel, we don't have spring weather. We just do not have spring weather. So we're out here in the blazing heat. I got to get the garden planted because I'm not really given any other option, because these little cell packs, I was waiting because it was too cold, and now I'm trying to wait because it's too hot. It's like, oh my gosh, this has been a crazy season so far. And, I'm not complaining. I'm enjoying the warm weather. It could definitely be colder. And it could be a tad bit more comfortable, but hey, at least it's not snowing, so we'll take it. But I've got to get the stuff in the ground, and it was brought to my attention that a lot of you wanted to see a video on transplanting mistakes. And so I figured now would be a good time to film this video, because I'm actually kind of forced, I'm forced no other option to make one of these mistakes. And so I figured let's just talk about some of the mistakes I see people making when transplanting. So the first one is one that I have to do because I'm given no other option, and that's because I simply can't wait any longer, because these plants are going to die if I leave them in their cell packs. And so that is planting during a heat wave. You never, ever, under any circumstances, want to transplant during a heat wave, unless, of course, you're given no other option where your plants are going to die if you leave them in their containers. These plants have been in here. These cucumbers have been in these containers now for 5 weeks, and these cells are way too small for 2 plants per cell. The reason why you don't want to wait, why you don't want to plant during a heat wave, is because the stress from the heat can sometimes just be way too much for your seedlings. Anything over 90 degrees pretty much will just bake the seedlings. Now, the seedlings are so limp. I just watered them. I mean, I've kept them in the garage, in the shaded garage, and I've been watering them and bringing them out to get some sun at least, so they don't go from shade to sun, because that's also bad. The seedlings, they're so tender. They haven't had a chance to strengthen their stems and their leaves, and I see so many people move their whole entire garden out during a heat wave. And if you can afford to wait a couple days, even 3 or 4 days, like I said, I just cannot wait. They will die, guaranteed. And so if you can wait even 3 or 4 days, wait for that heat to break, put them in the garden then. Do not rush this, because it's something you're going to regret doing it. The leaves will dehydrate so rapidly in this heat and the direct sun. So definitely a big mistake. Now, because I'm forced to plant today, I did wait until after the heat of the day. That is mistake number 2. No matter if it's a heat wave or not, you don't want to plant during the heat of the day. That's when the sun is at its strongest. It is completely insane to try to plant out your garden when the sun is directly overhead, and it's anywhere from 11 o'clock till about 3 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock now, so we're well out of the heat of the day. And it's just something that you want to wait for, because the sun, it's so hot, even if it's not during a heat wave, that again, it's going to dehydrate these little seedlings. So you want to be careful. You want to give them the least amount of stress as possible. So just do not put them in during the heat of the day. It's not, anytime you wouldn't be out at the beach sunbathing, these don't have an option to put on sunscreen. These are forced to sit out in the sun. And so that stress can really take a toll on your transplants. The third mistake I see way too many people making is transplanting during cold weather. In the early spring, right now, definitely not, it's still considered spring, but doesn't feel like early spring. But a lot of places, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4 even, where your nights are still in the high 30s, low 40s, you do not want to transplant a lot of your crops out into the garden until the soil has warmed up past about 40 to 45 degrees. Because if your soil is still cold and cool, if you plant them out, what's going to happen is you have a very high probability of rot. Damp, cool soil just doesn't come to life like warm soil does. Warm soil brings out the aerobic bacteria, the good bacteria in the soil. It brings out the beneficial fungi. It also helps actually to remove excess moisture from the soil, so there's not a whole lot of dampness just kind of sitting there with no movement. And so if you plant your stuff during a cold snap, even if there's no threat of frost, I still actually prefer to wait till after that dip, so that things are kind of a little more normal, because even if I'm out of the threat of frost, you can still run the risk of rots and molds, because that's what they love, is that cold, damp soil. So do not transplant your stuff when it's cool out, because that's a big mistake. Now, the fourth mistake I see way too many people making is burying their plants too deep. With things like tomatoes, you can bury tomatoes a little bit deeper and they'll get by because they have roots that'll set all along the stem. They're a vine. But with things like cucumbers, peppers, beets, pretty much any other crop, you can't bury them any deeper. And I see way too many people taking their plants out of a plug like this. They'll take their plants out and they'll bury them like an inch or two deeper up to the first set of leaves. They'll bury them all the way up to this first set of leaves here. And you just can't get by doing that, because cucumbers won't set roots all along the stem. They just won't. And so when you take your plant, it's very important that you bury the plant only as deep as it's already growing. The soil level that you want to stick to is pretty much the soil level that is at the top of the cell. When you plant your stuff out, you don't want to just bury it up and hill it up super high, because what that's going to do is it's going to cause the plant to actually rot. The stem is not going to set down roots, and it holds moisture at a part in the stem that can't set down roots, and so it ends up rotting. So you really want to make sure that you don't overbury the plant. I cannot tell you, I think it's one of the biggest problems I see gardeners making, is burying their stuff too deep. And it's an honest mistake. I mean, you just assume, oh, well, if it's a little leggy, if it's a little floppy, well, I'm just going to bury it a little deeper. That's not the way to think about it. As the plant matures, as it grows, it'll sturdy up its stem, but you don't want to just bury it deeper, assuming you're going to kind of sturdy that stem for it, because then you'll end up with rot and the plant will pretty much die. So you do not want to do that. That's the fourth mistake, and definitely one of the most popular. All right, and the fifth and final mistake I see way too many gardeners making, and this is probably about the second most common mistake I see gardeners making when transplanting, and it's also shocking to me because of how often we drill this home, but it's not watering after you transplant. Now, when we take these cells and we move them into the soil, the thinking is that I've already watered these cell packs, they're very moist, I don't want to overwater. And I think that's the reason why a lot of gardeners don't water, because I think any gardener realizes their plants need water in order to survive. So I don't think it's coming from a place of just forgetfulness. I think what it's coming from is a place of fear of overwatering. And that's an honest fear. And if you're someone that is just forgetful, that's okay too. We all make mistakes. And I have fallen into this category of someone that doesn't want to overwater, and so I didn't water after I transplanted, and I've paid dearly for it. So if you're sitting there beating yourself up over this and you've lost seedlings, or you've just planted out your garden, quick, there's still time to run out there and water. but I've fallen into this category. Don't beat yourself up. We think, we always talk about how overwatering is really bad for seedlings, but it's a whole lot different when you move them from a cell pack into the surrounding soil. The reason why is because this cell pack might be damp. I just watered these this morning, but if I move them and they're damp and I move them into dry soil, there's a process called capillary action that takes place. And that's where the moisture moves from a moist area to a dry area. And if the surrounding soil is drier than this cell pack is, it's going to wick away that moisture. And since these seedlings are so temperamental and so tender, they can suffer from dehydration far faster than a plant that's already growing in this soil. And so I always have to make that conscious effort of, if I plant, then I water. Another great way to think about it, if you're someone that that soaks their whole bed. I don't soak my whole bed because I only water where my plants are, just so I don't encourage weeds to grow up, but I also don't waste water where there's not a plant growing. So I don't necessarily water my whole bed, but if you are someone that waters your whole bed, a great way to give yourself some insurance from forgetting is just to pre-soak your bed before you plant. If you pre-soak your bed, everything's moist, you don't have to then go back and water. Now, the other condition is that it's going to rain in a couple hours. If it's going to rain in a couple hours, then you don't have to water. But unless those two conditions are met, you should always water, whether it's hot or cold, whether it's windy or not. You should always water your plants in. And that way you can guarantee that there's not going to be any dehydration, because these seedlings, I think, like I said, the most common thing I see is someone say, well, I just planted my stuff that looked great. I had them all growing. I gave them water before I transplanted them. I moved them into the soil, and 2 hours later, they were laying limp on the soil. It happens all the time. And like I said, it's happened to me, so I'm speaking from experience. So just go back and water your plants in. Always water. I guess that's the most important message I can give you guys, is always water after you transplant, and then you should be fine. So those are the 5 mistakes I see gardeners making when transplanting. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And sorry if it seems like I'm a little frazzled. It's because it's so hot out here. It takes a little bit to get used to this, and it's downright hot. So I'm gonna get these plants planted. I'm gonna get inside where it's cool. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. Make sure to throw a like up there if you did enjoy, and we'll catch you all on the next episode. All right, go big or go home, everyone. Bye.